This is the third tutorial in functional harmony, the basics. In today's tutorial, I'm going to talk about the relationship between the notes in a major scale and the chords. I'm also going to tell you about the names of those chords. So just to remind you, in the previous tutorials, I was talking about the chords in a major scale being numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I also talked about the intervals between notes. So I talked about how, for example, C to E is a major third and C to E flat is a minor third. They're also measured in semitones, so C to E, although it's a major third, you get there by going up 5 semitones. So that can be quite confusing because the interval is clearly a different number to the amount of semitones that you have to go up to arrive there. But that's the third note in the major scale of C major, which has no sharps and has no flats. We talked about how the third determines whether the chord is major or minor. So this is a C major chord, this is a C minor chord, and the only difference is the third is a major third in the major chord and a minor third in the minor chord. I then talked about the special relationship between chord 5, which is G major in C, and chord 1, which is C major. Talked about why that might be, how it related to physics, how it could also be that you've heard a lot of Western classical music or just Western music, which has a lot of those two chords in them. The way that we call that a cadence, how a cadence is the end of a phrase or an end of a sentence. So you often get this. Also talked about the leading note. I'll be talking a little bit more about that, how that really pulls to chord 1 or C, if you're in C, or the tonic, which I will explain in a minute. So I'd like to go from that terminology now, when I said the tonic. So when I introduced you to the chords, the major scale, I called them chord 1, chord 2, chord 3. Now I'm going to call them other names. This is what we call, when we're talking about relationships between different, sometimes different chords, sometimes it can refer to different keys. So if we modulate, we change key, we can say that's a modulation to the dominant, and the dominant is chord 5. I think I inferred that in a previous tutorial. So chord 1 is called, this chord is called the tonic. 2 is called the supertonic. Chord 3 is the mediant, middle, you can see the connection there. Chord 4 is the subdominant, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Chord 5 is the dominant. So we talked a lot about the dominant chord, chord 5. Submediant, and I'll come back to that in a minute. This is called the leading note, and we talked about the leading note in the last tutorial about how it led to the tonic. The chord is also called the leading note, which is in itself a bit misleading, but anyway, that's what it's known as. So I was going to come back to the subdominant. So the dominant is 5 notes, a fifth higher than the tonic. And actually, if you went the other way, 5 notes down, you get to the subdominant. So 4 notes up is the same as 5 notes down. And the same with the mediant. So the mediant is E minor if you're in the key of C, and the submediant is the same distance going down. So you get the submediant there. So those terminologies, those names are really useful when you're talking about relationships between certain chords. You might refer to the dominant resolving to the tonic. You might say it goes to the subdominant. Very useful when you're talking about modulating to different keys. Also, sometimes we talk in those terms when we're talking in different keys. So for example, if you're taking an ensemble and you have transposing instruments in different keys, you can just talk about relationships between keys rather than go, oh, you're in this key, you're in this key, which can be very, very confusing. So The dominant resolving to the tonic is chord 5. And if I add a 7th, so this is the root, 3rd, 5th and the 7th, we get the dominant 7th. So you will hear that quite a lot, the dominant 7th resolving to the tonic. That tends to come at the end of at the end of a piece. So often a cadence, I explained that was the end of a piece or an end of a phrase, will have a dominant 7th in there. It just pulls a little bit more strongly. But sometimes people will refer to 7th chords as dominant 7th. So I just wanted to draw attention to that, especially in jazz. They'll say, oh yeah, there's a dominant 7th there. That term has now kind of been attached to 7th chords, although they don't necessarily have to resolve in jazz. So for example, in a blues, it's a C7 chord, and then it'll move to an F7 chord. Someone might say, oh, that's the dominant 7th. So it's just worth knowing that difference. So knowing the names of those chords, the tonic, the supertonic, the mediant, all that is really useful in terms of when you're talking to musicians about movement of chords. In the next tutorial, what I'd like to do is take some common sequences and explain them, and show you how that they're used in many jazz standards.